Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, TJ Mabardi. Today is Thursday, July 25th, and today we are coming to you live with some breakdowns of a lot of New York stories today, with the New York Knicks yesterday announcing that Tom Thibodeau is going to be sticking around the Knicks for a while. He and the Knicks agreed to a 3-year contract extension, so we will be breaking that down and the chances that the Knicks have to dethrone the Celtics in the East next season. We're also going to be looking across town, where yesterday wrapped up the Subway Series between the New York Mets and the New York Yankees, so we will be breaking that down as well, recapping all of the action there and just talking about the trajectories that each of these two teams are on moving forward, as the trade deadline is just days away at this point. Sticking with baseball, we have some other news in the New England area, where the Boston Red Sox have signed manager Alex Cora to a new contract extension as well, which kind of came as a massive surprise, at least to me. All of the reporting up to this point has been that Cora is going to walk in free agency, but they take that off the table by signing him to a 3-year deal. So we'll talk about that, as well as the fact that the Red Sox just lost 2 out of 3 games to the Colorado Rockies in what has been a pretty disastrous start to the second half of the season. And then finally, we are going to be wrapping up the show as we continue on our breakdowns of all 32 teams in the NFL ahead of the upcoming season. Today we are moving on to the AFC South, and we are going to be starting with the Houston Texans. Will C.J. Stroud be able to help the Texans continue to build on the surprising success that they had last year, or will they come crashing back down to reality a little bit, as C.J. Stroud could potentially face a sophomore slump? We'll be answering that question and more. But before we get into all of that, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. To any of our viewers, be sure to use the comment section to give us your thoughts on the latest happenings in sports, as we try and make this show as interactive as possible. And finally, if you would consider leaving a tip or donation, you can use the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker, gsmcpodcast.net. Anything would be greatly appreciated there. Yesterday morning, we saw the news break that Tom Thibodeau has agreed to a new contract extension to remain with the New York Knicks through the 2027-28 season. Tibbs took over a few years ago. His first season was in 2020-21, and it has largely been a big success, where there was winning seasons in 3 out of 4 years, and coming for a Knicks franchise that was really struggling for a lot of the 21st century they were always in conversations about who they could be getting and what types of moves they could make to make a splash and put together some type of a playoff run, but that just had not been the case, and Thibodeau has sort of reoriented that by rejuvenating the organization, getting the most out of the pieces that are currently in place, and the Knicks are absolutely on a rise as of these latest years. So Thibodeau, who is now 175 and 143 with the Knicks, he is 5th in franchise history for wins, the 2-time coach of the year that is closing in on 1,000 career wins as a head coach. He is very likely going to hit that mark by the time that this contract expires. He's currently at 9-16. So if you look at last season, where he won 50 games, it was 47 games the year prior. Continuing on that type of trajectory would get it done for him. So you definitely have to feel good for Tibbs to some degree. I know that there are definitely people out there who have their share of complaints about Tibbs maybe overplaying some of his stars, and I do feel like that criticism is warranted to some degree. Now, at the same time, when we're talking about the playoffs, you obviously understand that it's kind of leaving it all out there on the floor, but It still has done some damage to a number of star players that he's had on his rosters over the course of the years. But besides all of that, Thibodeau is somebody who has been extremely committed to winning. He's always been a culture setter, and that's what the Knicks were really in need of at the time where they brought him in. And luckily, they were able to pair him up with some other crucial stars at that time. Mostly Jalen Brunson, who they signed a couple years ago. They just signed him to a new contract extension this past year, and it has been a very impressive run for a couple years now, where they've made the conference semifinals in 2 of the past 3 seasons. Knicks fans, and I think it's warranted, would tell you that they should have made the conference finals this year if they were fully healthy. Again, I do agree with that sentiment, but the Knicks weren't just satisfied with that. Like I mentioned, they have Jalen Brunson, who they just re-signed to a contract at the trade deadline last year. They made a move for OG Anunoby. They bring him back on an expensive deal. They're bringing Tibbs back, so they are choosing to stick with this core that was able to win them 50 games last year and have them as the 2 seed in the Eastern Conference. But they're going above and beyond as well, where they made the move for Mikal Bridges earlier this offseason as well. And when that trade breaks, you see all of the draft picks that are attached to the deal, and it feels like a lot. And to this point, I can't tell you definitively that there's no chance that this does end up hurting them, but ultimately, you see the first round picks that they dealt out, and it sort of masks the fact that they gave up pretty much nothing in terms of actual talent that is going to get rotation minutes in these next few years where they feel like they have a window they need to capitalize on. The only real significant rotational piece that they moved was Bojan Bogdanovic, who was another one of their additions through the trade deadline this past year. And ultimately, the fit just didn't ever really seem to be there of Bogdanovic in a Tom Thibodeau system. So I'm sure he was fully willing to move on from Bogdanovic, and instead he gets Mikal Bridges, who is kind of the ultimate player for his system. Tibbs was probably licking his lips when he saw Mikal Bridges being just as available as he has been over the course of his career. I want to double check, because I think when he was traded from the Suns to the Nets in 2022-23, yeah, he ended up playing 83 games that year. He gives all-out effort on both sides of the ball. He's a part of those Villanova Knicks of the core with Brunson and Hart and DiVincenzo, and now they bring in their running mate in Mikal Bridges, and the Knicks feel like they have a golden opportunity in front of them to compete over the course of these next few years, where last year we saw, again, the well-roundedness of this Knicks roster, top 10 in offensive and defensive efficiency last year. Now, they lose Isaiah Hartenstein in free agency, which I'm not going to say it's make or break. There's probably going to be at least a couple of different bigs that will be available at the trade deadline next season, so they could probably patch together some minutes there. Mitchell Robinson is an option for them if he is healthy. Now, that has unfortunately been a pretty big if over the course of the past couple of years, but a defensive monster Robinson is, so we will see what they're able to get out of him. Again, the rebounding has been one of the biggest advantages for the Knicks over the past couple of years, and Hartenstein is a loss there, but they just did not have the money to be able to hold on to him, so they end up losing him. And the other kind of big difference from this team that was making a run, or at least seemed to be in the playoffs, is the fact that Julius Randle is going to return next year, and it's going to be very interesting to see how he fits in with this group of players who they probably, to some degree, not that Julius Randle is a bad teammate or anything, but there's going to likely be a little bit of a preferential treatment there, where it's all of these college friends playing with one another, and Julius Randle is a little bit on the outside. But I still go back to that game that happened right before the All-Star break. It was when Jalen Brunson was announced as a first-time All-Star, and he ended up putting up, I think it was 50 points. And Julius Randle, you saw that there was just such genuine joy that he had for Brunson. So I don't think it's going to be a distraction. There was a little bit of a narrative from NBA fans in the community that the Knicks are better off without Julius Randle. Now that they have somebody like Mikal Bridges who can be a secondary creator, we saw in Brooklyn after he got traded to the Nets in that 22-23 season, when he was with the Nets, he was being a little bit more aggressive offensively, and we saw that he could potentially be a franchise cornerstone, averaging 26 points per game in 27 appearances, shooting 48% from the field. There was a lot of promise there, but ultimately it was never really going to be the case that he was the number one option on a championship team. And now that I feel like he has that experience as the primary option, it does maybe at least give the Knicks a little bit of... It gives him a little bit more experience to carry the workload when they need Jalen Brunson to take a little bit more of a breather. And Julius Randle, at the same time, is one of those players where he has been All-NBA. I want to say it's two-time All-NBA. In the past couple seasons, it would have been in 2021 and 2023. He's been All-NBA, so it's somebody that I don't necessarily love his play style. I feel like intensity can kind of waver at times, especially on the defensive side of the floor. He can take his fair share of heat checks, which, to be fair, we're talking about the NBA here. What star player doesn't? But I still think that Randle is going to be able to provide a number of different options, and who knows, for the Knicks, there's a chance that they could end up rolling out a little bit of a small ball lineup with Randle at the 5, and I know that is a very small team. Julius Randle is just 6'8", but you talk about putting those Knicks guys together, or those Villanova guys together, and having Julius Randle at the 5. Randle's a good rebounder. When he wants to be committed on defense, he can be. So again, just a lineup out there that I would be very curious to see if they get any runway this year. Again, ideally for Knicks fans, Mitchell Robinson is available for them, for the majority of the season, and they won't even necessarily have to worry about that quite as much. But again, just a different look out of this lineup that I definitely would be curious to see take the court with one another. But I think in this Eastern Conference, as things currently stand, it's the Boston Celtics who just re-signed everybody from last year. You can argue about the playoff path, but the Celtics were always the team to beat in the Eastern Conference, and I would say the NBA, but I still feel like maybe things play out differently if the Celtics have to face the Nuggets in the finals. But at least in the Eastern Conference, we knew for the entirety of the year that the Celtics were the team to go through, and ultimately they didn't really face that level of competition last year, and it was because of some dysfunction with the other contenders, that are at least perceived contenders, going into the year. The Knicks dealing with all the injuries they were. You can say the same for the Bucks, but even with the Bucks, during the regular season, it was clear that something was off of what the expectations were. But I think that the Bucks are going to have a bounce back season. I would imagine that they win over 50 games this year, assuming Giannis and Dame are both healthy. I see that two-man game coming into fruition a little bit more this year. And then whatever you're going to get out of Philadelphia, maybe the Heat as well are able to, reemerge as a real threat in the playoffs this year. So I list all of these teams to say that there are teams that you can talk yourself into in the Eastern Conference. But for the most part, there are a lot of flaws with these contenders. And I feel like behind the Celtics, the Knicks are the most complete team in the Eastern Conference. Now, again, I still think that the ceiling for the Bucks is high, but you can say the same for the Knicks as well. And I think that they are going to have a really good chance again, especially with all of the options that they have now, and finally seeming like it was very much Brunson or bust for that offense last season. It seems like he is going to be able to delegate a little bit more. We might see Brunson's scoring stats dip a little bit, but that might even be for the betterment of the team as a whole, because again, we saw when Brunson wasn't running the show, they had a number of really impressive supplementary players, but nobody that you necessarily felt great about taking over a game outside of Brunson. So that's an area where I definitely think they improved. And I feel like this Thibodeau extension was a little bit of a no-brainer. Again, when you take the overall context of what the Knicks have been battling with over the course of the past decade or so, Tom Thibodeau has been able to establish a winning culture, one that is very much needed for the Knicks because they're under such a spotlight being the brand that they are, and it felt like they were disappointing for such a long time, not to knock Carmelo Anthony or anything, but during those years, it always felt like, well, maybe if they got another star, or maybe if Melo could take his game to another level. Just nothing, it never really played out there. It was good for just one playoff series win, and that's not what we expect from the Knicks. It became what we expected over the course of, a decade, because that's what they were showing us, and probably even more so than just a decade there alone. But now it feels like the Knicks are in the heart of contention, and again, I think that this was a must-do deal for the Knicks, and they are going to be very much back in contention next season. But the Knicks aren't the only team that is championship hopeful in that state, where we have the New York Yankees, who were on, of course, one of the all-time heaters at the beginning of the year, and over the past couple days, they were clashing with the surging New York Mets in the Subway Series, and the results may not have been what we expected. Only the second time in the history of that rivalry the New York Mets were able to sweep. So we're going to break down how exactly that played out, what it means big term, and the trajectories that both of these teams are on coming out of this game, and with the trade deadline right around the corner. So we will dive into all of that, but first, a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, and we just talked about the New York Knicks making a splash deal to re-sign their head coach, Tom Thibodeau. Across town, there was all types of splash as well, where we got the heated rivalry of the New York Mets and the New York Yankees in the Subway Series. Just a short 2-game series, but it did see the Mets sweep the Yankees for just the second time in the history of this rivalry, the only other time being in 2013. So again, only a 2-game series here. It's not like you can put a ton of stock into it, just like you can't really do so for any individual series. But definitely a morale win for the Mets, who are just riding high right now on vibes, where it just seems like everybody is enjoying themselves. Jose Iglesias is singing for the team, becoming a pop star. Grimace is becoming the face of, the rally symbol with the Knicks. But I do want to talk very quickly here. Everybody points to the Grimace throwing out the first pitch as the turning point in the season. He did so on June 12th. And the team rattled off 7 straight wins afterwards, but it was kind of more so if you take a step back. I look at May 29th when the Mets ended up losing to the Dodgers 10-3, and that was the day where the controversy broke out about Jorge Lopez throwing his glove over the netting into the crowd, and the Mets ended up DFAing him, and it was just highlighting a dysfunctional organization for the Mets, where at that point they dropped to 11 games under 500, and the season just seemed to be already lost, and it was a mess. But instead, they are coming back to life in a very loud fashion. Since that game, they are 21-15 and are in a playoff spot. Now, unfortunately for them, they are inherently going to be buried a little bit in terms of the divisional race because of who they are competing with for that sense, where nobody in the NL East is going to catch the Phillies at this point, even though the Phillies have I believe they lost yesterday and dropped another series. That's 2 straight series losses coming out of the All-Star break for them. But regardless, still have a 9-game cushion on the second place Atlanta Braves anyways. But, I mean, at this point, for the Mets to be in contention for a playoff spot would have sounded like a lot early on in June. But not just that, but they are holding the second wild card spot, granted in what is an incredibly close race there, and there are no guarantees whatsoever. But it has just been a really positive development for the Mets since then. And I don't know, I mean, you could probably start to put a case together of Team of Destiny vibes. I feel like the MLB, more than any other team, or more than any other league in American sports, does tend to have those Team of Destiny stories actually come full circle and lead to a championship. The Rangers kind of felt like it last year. I would say the Braves in 2021 definitely fell into that category. So maybe you can start to talk yourself into the Mets at this point, but that's obviously still a long way away. They have the trade deadline coming up. What seemed like a for sure seller just a month ago, they are now probably going to be more on the buying side. Now, I don't expect them to, get extremely aggressive in terms of their pursuit of adding some talent, but we could definitely see them working around the edges there. They have a very big series coming up against the Atlanta Braves, who are the lone wild card team ahead of them, of course, in that divisional race as well. So we'll see how that plays out for them. But on the other side of this, while the Mets are only getting better, the Yankees are still continuing to drop. And I by no means am I overreacting. The Yankees, I would almost guarantee, are going to be a playoff team this year as long as Aaron Judge and Juan Soto are both healthy. But they are dropping quick here, where they were 50-22 midway through June on June 15th. They are now 10-22 since then, one of the worst records in baseball. Now, the good news for the Yankees is, despite how negative it has been about the Yankees over the past 5-6 weeks, they're still just half a game, I think a game and a half back of the Orioles for the division. Now, the O's also played earlier today, and last time I checked, they were killing the Marlins. It is 6-3 right now in the bottom of the ninth. Bases loaded, actually, though, for Jazz Chisholm. So we'll see if maybe things change there and the Orioles end up with a surprise loss, but we'll be sure to keep you updated on that. The Yankees are still in this 100%, and I would say in general, even take the American League East out of the conversation, that there really isn't a team in the American League that feels like a juggernaut. You look in the National League, and ultimately it does feel like the Phillies and the Dodgers are really the two teams to beat. So, it's a lot of uphill battle, I would say, in the National League. American League, it is very open. So we'll see how that all plays out. As it currently stands for the Yankees, they're in the mix up for this division. I'm sure they're going to make some type of moves at the trade deadline following this series loss. The future of Juan Soto with the Yankees is by no means guaranteed. Going to be a free agent this summer, going to be extremely expensive as he is still just 26 years old. And we've already heard Steinbrenner make comments about whether or not it's feasible to have this high of a payroll for an extended period of time. And I feel like the Yankees are probably going to buckle and give Juan Soto everything they can. But even still with that, you're going to have so much money wrapped up in Aaron Judge and Juan Soto that there are going to be other financial handicaps, 100%. So we will, my point being that they could re-sign Juan Soto, and I still would have my worries about what they look like long term. But what we know right now definitively is that they are in the conversation as long as they have the two of them. The problem is they don't necessarily have all that much help outside of the two of them. ESPN showed a stat last night about how there were only 4 players on the team with an OPS plus of 100 or better, in Judge and Soto, and then Stanton and Ben Rice. Rice fell out of that conversation as well, too. He's looking at 98, and even if he was at that 100 mark, Rice, even though he's demonstrated some good power since making his debut, he's still a very unknown commodity, so it's not like he is somebody you can heavily bank on. Now, as for Stanton, he's been out since late June, which has definitely not helped the Yankees, and he was in the midst of having a nice bounce-back year where last season was probably the worst of his career, so seeing him be able to rebound is definitely a positive. Gleyber Torres is somebody who you still feel like, he's having a down year, but has been good in a lot of the past handful of seasons, so ultimately, we'll see how it plays out after he comes back from injury, but they just need a dude. They don't need him to be out in the field. They don't need him to be some speedster in the base paths. He just has to hit, and specifically hit home runs, drive guys in. And I feel pretty confident that that's a role that he can take advantage of for sure. But looking at this game and sort of staying with the topic of Aaron Judge and Juan Soto kind of being it right now, in Game 1, the Mets walked Aaron Judge in his first 4 plate appearances. Didn't even give him the opportunity to hurt them. They only pitched to him in the 9th, actually, where Diekman was able to strike him out. And, ultimately they got a little bit more from the others in Game 2. Unfortunately, not quite as much from Judge himself. Game 2, I know you look at the score and it ends up being a blowout, but the Yankees were actually in that game for a while, but unfortunately, kind of the theme for the Yankees in this series was not being able to drive in runners in scoring position. There was some stat that they flashed, something like 3 for 30, 4 for 30 with runners in scoring position, specifically against the Mets this season. So, ultimately, it is a little bit of a misjustice there, and again, I would say that the overall final score doesn't quite indicate how in it the Yankees were. For a lot of that, maybe the pitching ends up blowing up again, but part of that issue as well was the fact that Garrett Cole has just not looked like himself up to this point in the year, and you have to feel like eventually he's able to come back around, considering last season he was dominant, ends up winning the Cy Young Award, and we're not far removed by any means, but Cole this season has been really struggling up to this point. In this game, too, he pitched 5 2/3 innings. It was 8 hits, 2 walks, 4 strikeouts, and 6 earned runs, allowed 3 home runs along the course of the way. So, apologies for throwing out all of these numbers at you, but now his season stats as a whole: 7 starts, 35 innings pitched, 39 hits, 12 walks, 21 earned runs with 9 home runs. He has a 5.40 ERA, which is the worst of his career. I believe the worst whip of his career as well, rocking a 1.457 at this point. Now, again, there's still plenty of time for Cole to turn this around, but the Yankees are going to need him, and they're going to need some extra help. We'll see exactly how that plays out over the course of these next couple days. Bullpen depth is one of the biggest things that is being pointed to in terms of the Yankees and how they can get better right now. They're also desperately looking for a leadoff hitter, so both of those are things to keep an eye on with the Yankees moving forward here, but they are set to face off against a weekend series with the Boston Red Sox, who just yesterday made a big signing in bringing back Alex Cora on a new 3-year contract extension for him to remain the manager. And that's what we are going to be diving into next. Before we go to break, though, very quick, I just mentioned it was 6-3 in the ninth for the Orioles. Jazz reached on an error, and now a sacrifice fly and a single has that game tied up in the bottom of the ninth, and a chance for De La Cruz to walk it off for the Marlins. So we'll be keeping an eye on that, but we're going to be taking our next break here, and we're going to be diving into that story about the Red Sox extending Alex Cora. So stick with us, and we will be right back after this quick break. Don't go anywhere.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we are continuing to talk some MLB. The Boston Red Sox yesterday made a little bit of a surprise move. They extended their manager, Alex Cora, to a new 3-year deal. And this comes as a surprise because the reports have been for the entirety of the season, really, that Cora was expected to leave after his contract ended at the end of this year. And Cora has made it a point that he wasn't going to discuss contract negotiations during the course of this season, so we thought we were going to have to wait, until this winter to hear what the latest on Cora is. There was a Bleacher Report article that just came out in the past 24 hours breaking down this negotiation process between Cora and the franchise, and it referenced how maybe the Red Sox were the ones that were holding out a little bit on recommitting to Cora, and that they needed to see how the year played out. I feel like it was more the other way around, where Cora kind of had all the leverage in this situation, where he is renowned as a top 5, maybe top 3 manager in the MLB, in that wherever he ended up this offseason, he was going to have his choice of jobs available and that he was going to get paid a lot of money for it. And ultimately, that could have been the Red Sox, or it could have been the Dodgers, the Phillies, the Yankees, or anybody else that may underachieve a little bit in the postseason this upcoming season and could have an opening coming to them. But now all of that is hypothetical because the Sox are signing Cora to a new 3-year contract extension worth just over $7 million a year annually. I believe it's 7.25 annually, which kind of feels like a bargain for Cora, who obviously led the Red Sox to the World Series championship and winning in 2018, putting together one of the most dominant seasons in Red Sox history. Considering Craig Counsell last offseason reset the market by getting a big-time deal from the Chicago Cubs of 5 years, $8 million per season, that Cora was probably going to hit that type of a number. And obviously that was not the standard by any means, but it seemed like Cora was going to be able to probably, to some degree, help contribute to resetting the market, and that's not really what happened, where I understand Cora settling for a standard 3-year deal because, again, like I talked about, it's kind of him waiting on the Red Sox to see, well, is this front office group going to actually do anything for me to have a contender and even have a chance of being a perennial playoff team? And over the course of the past couple years, the answer has been no there. And they haven't necessarily shown all that much this season either, where maybe they make some marginal moves that have played out. Really, the biggest one was Dom Smith becoming an actual, worthy player on the team. And now he's a bottom of the order type of bat. He provides you whatever he can defensively, never exactly looks elegant, but he makes the right plays, and that was, the big move for the Red Sox really so far this season. And ultimately, we have, I was not expecting Cora to actually be in on what the Red Sox are building. So I'm curious what behind the scenes went down, because something had to have changed, because it seemed like Cora and the front office did not have a good relationship, that Cora was very frustrated with them for not surrounding him with more talent, and now all of a sudden he's re-upping for the next 3 years. Now, from his own words, this had in large part had to do with his family, where he even mentioned it in his press conference. His family is very happy where they are right now in Massachusetts, in that he has a couple sons that are just 7 years old. His wife loves the city of Boston. He is very well renowned in the city. All of the frustrations from the Red Sox community isn't with Cora, it's with the ownership group and John Henry and Sam Kennedy and the likes of them. So, I think that he has a pretty good deal set up for him already, where he has been a champion. Yes, it's a big market. Yes, there's pressure to succeed, but the pressure really isn't on him. It's more so on the ownership group. And as long as they are on board with Cora being in charge here, he kind of just gets to, I wouldn't say kick back. It's still a very, demanding job that he has, but at the same time, I don't know how much pressure he's really facing, or how much he's ever really going to have to face until the rest of the front office does something to show the Red Sox community that there should be pressure to win. As much as family is important, and I'm glad to hear that his family is as happy as they are right now in Boston, like I mentioned, he has not been content, and it feels like something would have had to change internally in the direction that they see themselves going. And, shortly after the announcement that Cora is going to be remaining in town, Craig Breslow, their new president of baseball operations, outright said that they are going to be looking to improve the team. Quote, "We're going to look to improve this team." And he even specifically referenced some of the glaring needs that are currently on this roster. They really struggle against left-handed pitching, so they need to go get a reliable right-handed bat. They have dealt with a number of injuries to both the starting rotation and the bullpen, so they could use some, maybe not necessarily a definitive ace, but just getting some more reliable starters in the mix there. And he was talking about this idea of picking a lane, which, to be fair, could ultimately result in very little. So I don't want to put too much stake into the comments that Breslow made, but it sounds like they are sort of trying to work their way back into committing, and they've been so on and off, and you listen to the way that Breslow has talked about it, he's kind of been, playing, walking on the line of he hasn't committed to buying, but he hasn't made any comments about selling either, which for the Red Sox, that's kind of where they've been these past couple years, where we saw in 2022, they were buying and selling at the deadline. That's when they were moving off of guys like Christian Vazquez, and they brought in a bunch of rentals such as Hosmer, and they end up bringing in Reese McGuire, who had himself a pretty tough day yesterday. If you saw anything about that game, we'll be diving into that Rockies series very shortly here, but Reese McGuire got cussed out a little bit in probably the worst possible way by Colorado Rockies pitcher Cal Quantrill. You can look that up on your own because the words that he said are not appropriate for this podcast. But, I think that ultimately when you look, and last year in 2023, they trade for Luis Arias, and the idea of just having a more reliable second baseman, somebody that could maybe be solid for them. But that being said, I don't think that they need to go and get any superstar talent necessarily, but would like to see them, more significantly make a commitment to this team as opposed to almost trying to Jedi mind trick the Red Sox fans into believing that they are committed to winning and that they are trying to win currently. And I feel like it has to be that Alex Cora knows there is some type of a plan. Listen, it's kind of almost a cliche at this point that in the MLB, the trade deadline is 100% a seller's market. Everything is extremely expensive because you have so many teams that feel like they are in the realm of making one of those wild card spots ever since they added the third one. You look at the National League and where that currently stands, you have a good 5-6 teams that are, in that type of area where from the Braves to the Reds, that's 6 teams that are all 6 games within one another, and we still have a lot of the season left. So it is, I'm definitely not expecting the Red Sox to make any type of a massive move this trade deadline. It would be cool to see a front office and an organization that is a big market team to actually commit to that. But even if they don't, it feels like this winter has to be at some point, a change of something. Because Alex Cora seems to think that he believes in this offseason, in this organization, the direction that they're headed in. He could have gotten paid basically anywhere he would have wanted to go, but instead he decided to re-up for the Red Sox. So we will have to see what that ultimately means for them. But I did just reference that they played the Colorado Rockies in a 3-game series, and they ended up dropping 2 out of 3. And it has been a bit of a disaster for the Red Sox since coming back from the All-Star break, where the vibes seem to be increasingly growing at that time period. So we are going to dive into what went wrong for the Red Sox in that series and what's been going wrong for them over the course of these past 2 series, and whether or not it's something that can be reversed and find their way back into playoff contention, or if they're going to bottom out, which we've seen them do in the past couple of seasons. So we will be diving into all of that, but first a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we continue to talk some MLB. We just talked about the Boston Red Sox re-signing manager Alex Cora to a new 3-year contract extension. So for Red Sox fans, I'm sure the day started very positive overall, but things got ugly really quick because in the rubber match, Game 3 of that series against the Rockies, the Red Sox got their teeth kicked in, losing 20-7. It was 20-3 up until that 8th inning, so the Sox were able to put in a couple garbage time runs, you could say, but it was another very disappointing series loss, and one that feels like got away from them. You go back to Game 1 where it almost seemed like at that point it just wasn't really written in the stars for the Red Sox to be able to pull out this series, where, I mean, it should have been. If you look at it ultimately, I mean, the Red Sox cruised in Game 2 with a 6-0 win, and ultimately we saw the fact that, in Colorado, they could have gotten themselves right and they would have continued to play through the game and be able to, come away strong. But Game 3, like I mentioned, was just an absolute disaster. And we saw Nick Pivetta, who I know going into the game had an ERA above 14 against the Rockies in his career. He had really struggled in Colorado his first couple appearances, and this was maybe the worst starting performance I have ever seen from Nick Pivetta. It's probably the worst Red Sox game period I have seen from them, where Pivetta goes 2 2/3 innings, 10 hits, 8 runs, 6 strikeouts, and allowed 2 home runs. Now, sure, he got very little help from his defense, which is part of why it was such a disastrous game for the Red Sox, because every aspect of what they were doing was not playing out for them well. The pitching wasn't there. The defense behind him was also really bad. Rafaela dropping a ball in center field, Jarren Duran not being able to, actually pick up a ball and try and throw someone out at home. It was just ugly all around. Jamie Westbrook as well committing an error. I mean, the Red Sox ultimately, at the end of this game, they're listed with 4. It probably should have been 5 because I think they reversed the Rafaela call at one point, but it was just such an ugly, ugly game. And yeah, Pivetta's ERA now against the Rockies is now up to 15.51 in his 5 starts. Really, really ugly stuff there. And for the Red Sox, again, the vibes were really high coming into the All-Star break, where they were holding on to that final wild card spot, and it seemed like they were building up some momentum. They had their best record of the season, and since there, it's 2 straight series losses and losing 5 out of 6 games. The Dodgers series is one thing, where it is the Dodgers. Now, I talked about this before. They should have won a couple of those games. Games 1 and 2, they both let slip out of their hands at the very end. The lack of being able to drive guys in with runners in scoring position was a massive problem for them in that series. The Dodgers at that point, yes, they're the Dodgers, but they were dealing with a lot of injuries themselves, especially to their pitching staff, and it seemed like it could have been a big statement series. They dropped that one. Ultimately, you feel bad that they didn't get a game, and that they probably had a couple that they let get away from them. It is still the Dodgers, though, which is just sort of a blanket statement that hides up all of the rest of the ugliness that took place there, but it's something that you can at least sort of bank on a little bit. But this series against the Rockies, there is very little excuse, and I think that it more than anything just kind of points to one of the biggest issues with the Red Sox is the fact that they absolutely need help in the bullpen. We saw, granted, Kenley Jansen was not available for this series. He's had a number of problems in Colorado throughout the course of his career with his heart, so ultimately he wasn't able to travel for this series, and even if he was there, I mean, there's just not enough go-to arms coming out of the bullpen, where last year we saw when the Red Sox were flirting with being competitive, they had Chris Martin in the 8th inning, and then they had Kenley Jansen in the 9th, and they were pretty shut down for the most part. And Martin has been injured for the majority of this year. When he's been playing, he has not been the same level of himself, so it has been a little bit of a mess there. And obviously pitching in Colorado, no matter what, is difficult anyways, but it was very, you go through the list of bullpen arms that they have, and there are very few of them that you actually feel good about. Now, Slayton, also currently on the IL, that's somebody you can kind of talk yourself into. Was really good at the beginning of the year. Had his bumps during the middle portion, but at least now, again, he's probably your second best bullpen arm. Starting rotation, now they have Giolito that is maybe going to be able to return this year. Even if he does, I'm not sure what type of expectations that you can fairly have for him. So I wouldn't put any stock in that. It would be very Red Sox for them to say, well, he's eventually going to come. So that's almost like a trade deadline acquisition in its own, but I'm not sure about that. Ultimately, Cooper Criswell actually had a really good start for them in Game 2. And he's put together a couple pretty good starts that you can't complain about all too much. That being said, feels like, you should ideally have your top-end starters in having Tanner Houck, whatever version of Brian Bayo you can get. And I guess it's Pivetta, but like I just mentioned, I mean, that's not super encouraging for the most part for the Red Sox of having depth to actually be able to go out and have a solid rotation for you. So they're going to need to address that. Like I mentioned before, they struggle against left-handed pitchers, so they need to go and get a right-handed bat. The name that's been most tied to them up to this point has been Luis Rengifo of the Los Angeles Angels, so we will see there, but ultimately just a very ugly start coming out of this second half of the season, and the magic might be over a little bit with the Red Sox. At this point, Fangraphs now has them with just a 36% chance to make the playoffs. That was over 50% ahead of the All-Star break. So things have been falling apart quickly for them, and I'm not really sure how they can necessarily talk themselves back into it. Again, it sounds like with Breslow that he was making some comments amidst the Cora extension that they are expecting to be improving the team at the trade deadline this year. We'll see what that means, because improve can be a pretty broad term there. Now, again, he specifically referenced the injuries to the pitching department, which is something that would be a great addition for them. And, even if it is marginal, could still be enough to at least get the Red Sox back to that, and a bat would be things you could feel a lot better about the Red Sox moving forward here. But even still, I mean, I just talked about it, though, with the Yankees a couple segments ago. I think that the American League is pretty open. And if you make the dance, you can find a way to, potentially go on a run here. The teams that are ahead of them really don't seem like world beaters, where you look at the Kansas City Royals, who the Red Sox just beat in a series prior to the All-Star break. It was their last series then, and the Minnesota Twins. And I think that the Red Sox can be competitive with either one of those teams, and it seems like, especially with how the Red Sox have been running the past couple of years, very analytics driven, maybe they look at that 36% chance to make the playoffs and they say this isn't the year. But it also is a little bit of a representation of there are some very clear needs for the Red Sox, and these past couple series have highlighted them. So instead of using it as an excuse to not buy into it, how about you actually just go address those needs and see what can happen? Because this Red Sox team was surging for a while, and obviously it's a long season, and maybe it was an outlier during that period of time, but I'm also not really sure. I feel like there is a great chance that they could at least be in competitive for that final wild card spot, and that's what I expect them to do down the stretch of the season. But let me know what you think. We are now going to be taking our final break of the show, and when we come back on the other side, we're going to be shifting gears to the NFL, where I am going to be giving a season preview for the Houston Texans as we go through all 32 teams. Today we are kicking off the AFC South with Houston, so we will be diving into that. But first, a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back. Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast for our final segment of the day, where today we are going to be diving into the Houston Texans' upcoming season and going through all of the major storylines that will determine whether or not they are able to build on the success that they had last year that kind of came out of nowhere, but they were able to do so because of the emergence of rookie quarterback CJ Stroud, who put up numbers that maybe rival any other rookie season from a quarterback that we've ever seen. 4,108 passing yards, 23 touchdowns, and just 5 interceptions. And that 5 interceptions is really what stands out to me, because it's not even like Stroud wasn't ever aggressive. He was just very smart about the way of, when to attack. And I just thought that he showed a supreme level of maturity for his age last season that does make me think he's going to be able to repeat it. Now, that being said, the NFL teams now have a full year of film on him, and they're going to look to attack all of his weaknesses. So this idea of a sophomore slump, which is, a very common phenomenon for NFL quarterbacks, I think that Stroud is going to be able to avoid any of that, and the Texans did a really good job this offseason, I think, of surrounding him with as much talent as they possibly could. And already they had a pretty good foundation on offense, but they then went out and added Stephon Diggs over the offseason, where Diggs was a little bit of a disgruntled asset by the time that he finished up his career with the Buffalo Bills. And I've talked about before, I think that he is probably outside of that top 10 wide receiver list in the NFL, but still an extremely explosive and dynamic athlete and weapon that can be a massive plus for CJ Stroud. And I think that ultimately, they got him at a reasonable price. They don't have him on the books past this season. So even if you are down on Diggs and this doesn't work out this year, it's not like this is going to be a move that potentially, cripples them financially for years to come. And Diggs can just be an explosive option for them. They already have pretty reliable, solid players around him as well. You look at Nico Collins, who had a breakout season last year and is probably going to be the go-to guy for Stroud once again this year. But Collins, again, is a little bit more of the reliable, not ultra athletic. He's a good athlete, and we saw his breakaway speed at times, but not somebody that, is necessarily the stature of Diggs in terms of making those types of massive plays. So I think that he's going to be able to continue to have success next year. You get Tank Dell, who was having an incredible rookie season up until his injury about partway through. That obviously handicapped them a lot. Diggs' addition as well does provide a little bit of insurance in case Dell isn't fully ready to go week one. It was a pretty devastating injury at the time. And I also like the fact that the Texans went out this offseason and re-signed Dalton Schultz, who became another one of those very reliable red zone threats. I think between Nico Collins and Dalton Schultz, they both showed a very good ability to work their way into open space in a limited red zone. And Diggs can probably be somebody who helps get them up the field, breaks out for these explosive plays, but even when the field shrinks, I think that Collins and Schultz are sort of go-to guys for Stroud and are going to continue to be so. Looking at some of their offensive numbers from last year, what really stands out is the fact that their run game just was not good enough, and in large part it is because of the offensive line, which is pretty middle of the pack. Now they're hoping, of course, that they can build on that to some degree, where they've used a handful of draft picks in recent years to try and build up this group. Kenyon Green and Juice Scruggs, both players that haven't really broke out yet, but were high draft capital was used on them, and if they can perform well, there are already a couple pretty established veterans in Laramie Tunsil at the left tackle position and Shaq Mason at right guard. So this could be a good offensive line, especially if we see those younger guys play into the role that we expect out of them. But for the run game as well, they went a couple years ago from having at least it seemed like an up and coming attack, where a couple years ago they had, I cannot believe I'm blanking on this name right now. You'll have to work with me for 2 seconds here, but it was before Singletary, Dameon Pierce, my God. But in his rookie season, Dameon Pierce, with a pretty bad offense around him, with Davis Mills at quarterback, with really no juice there, he was at least and maybe I'm getting caught up in the fantasy football numbers there, but Pierce was a good option for them, and he just kind of fell off the face of the earth last year. And last year, ultimately, they were relying more so on Devin Singletary, who played good for them down the stretch of the year. But this offseason, they go out and they acquire Joe Mixon, who, again, is sort of probably outside of that top 10 running back list, but is still a veteran that has a lot of experience and is a talented player that you would really like to see them be able to up their numbers there. Last season, like I mentioned, 22nd in the league with 96.9 rush yards per game. In the playoffs, they only averaged 57 per game across their 2 games. We saw Stroud was just kind of on his own and in that playoff game against the Ravens, and in large part that was because the offensive line was just failing him. So sort of brings back around to that conversation about the O-line, but the offense should be good, should probably improve, but we'll have to see on that front. Defensively, this was a team that sort of surprised a lot of people in terms of, again, relying on a lot of youth talent. Will Anderson Jr. ends up winning Defensive Rookie of the Year last year. Very well deserved. Took him a little bit to fully get into the entire flow of things, but once he arrived, he was absolutely dominant. He was top 4 in the league in pass rush win rate last season, and I expect that to continue. Henry To'o, the linebacker out of Alabama, he was a great piece for them as well. Then you look in the secondary, and of course Derek Stingley Jr., I believe he was the 4th overall pick in 2022, 3rd overall pick actually. So again, a lot of youth talent there, but a lot of very impressive pieces. I'll throw Christian Harris into that conversation as well. A lot of pieces that you really like, and they go out and they spend big this offseason, brought in a number of veterans to hopefully be able to, ease the nerves a little bit. Danielle Hunter, Azeez Al-Shaair, and Danico Autry. What I will say is they saw a couple losses as well. Jonathan Grenard is a very underrated edge rusher and got a pretty similar deal to Danielle Hunter. That it's interesting because Danielle Hunter is an upgrade in terms of the 2024 season. By the time both of these deals end up expiring, I feel like Grenard could be taking off, although we could see a little bit of a shell of Danielle Hunter at that point. But still, again, you look across the board, all 3 of these players have tons of playing experience. I would say at least Hunter and Al-Shaair have played in playoff games before. And, I think Al-Shaair is one of the more underrated linebackers in the NFL. So I'm excited to see him with D'Amico Ryans in charge of that defense and seeing what they're able to make happen. They lose Sheldon Rankins as well in the offseason, but at least get Danico Autry in his replacement. So it was maybe on the defensive end, a little bit of lateral moves. Again, I love the way that they have shaped up their linebacking core with Harris, Al-Shaair, and To'o. But, the Hunter and Autry moves, it's better than nothing, 100%. But at the same time, they did lose some key players to be able to pull this off. But looking at their schedule, very interesting. We've been using Sharp Football Analysis for the strength of schedules, and they have the Texans with the 7th hardest schedule in the NFL this year. But looking at it, I don't know if I necessarily feel that same way. Now, they do have some difficult out-of-division games. Specifically, you look at Week 1 in Baltimore against the Ravens, a little playoff rematch there. I don't have a great feeling about that game in particular. But, there's then a number of games that could be difficult out of division. I don't imagine that they're going to be able to sweep by any means. But you look at Week 4 against Pittsburgh, could be tough. Week 5 at Atlanta, could be tough. Week 14, you look at the Jets. And sneakily, I think out of all those, the Cardinals could be a team that could surprise people this year as well and be a little bit scrappier and, sneak up on some people. I'm a believer in Zach Gannon, Kyler Murray fully healthy, so we'll see there. We'll see if Kyler Murray's even, healthy by then. But I don't think that I see all too many extremely difficult matchups for them. Now, I think that the AFC South we saw last year sort of exceeded expectations, and the Texans were a very large part of that. It seemed like the Jaguars coming off of their playoff win in the 2022-23 season, and the fact that they were in it with the Chiefs as well in the divisional round, that this was going to be their division to take. They obviously deal with the Trevor Lawrence injuries down the stretch of the year. Inconsistencies were always sort of a part of their season, but, they will be good, I think, the Colts were a team that ended up winning, I believe it was 9 games last year, and were far more competitive than anybody expected there. That was with Gardner Minshew. If Anthony Richardson is able to consistently go out there and play like he did early on in the season when he was healthy, then the Colts can be a scary team, and I think that they're going to be in the mix as well. Not to jump too far ahead in terms of the predictions here, fixating on the Texans, but last year they went 4-2 within the AFC South, and I feel like that's probably going to be around the case again this year. Believe their line right now is at 9.5 games, and I am typically very hesitant to jump on a bandwagon and go all in on a team because of one successful season. This feels like there could be a real humbling involved. Something may go wrong in terms of the injury front, but I gotta be honest, I look at the schedule, I look at this roster, I really like what I'm seeing. So I have them going with 12-5, and I really don't feel great about that because of the fact, like I said, there's a lot of youth on this team, not just from the players, but from the coaching staff as well. With D'Amico Ryans, you have Bobby Slowick, who was the offensive coordinator. He comes back. It seemed like he was maybe going to get head coaching gigs. If he puts out another good season again this year, he will almost certainly be a head coach next year. Big time pressure. Maybe he melts there. But all that being said, again, I was really struggling, and definitely let me know in the comments section where you think those toughest games come from. I think that the Texans are in a very good position for the regular season. So looking how they stack up with the other teams that I've done projections so far, I have them with better records than the Bills, the Ravens, the Bengals, better than anybody else that I've covered so far this year. That being said, this is based off of the regular season. I'm taking the Ravens and the Bengals over the Texans in the playoffs. The Bills against the Texans, I think, would be extremely close. So by no means am I saying the Texans are definitively the best team in the AFC, at least out of the teams that I've previewed so far. But at the same time, again, I'm really struggling to see where these regular season losses come from for the Texans. But, again, let me know. Humble me, because I think I might need it a little bit in terms of my excitement for the Texans this year. Again, don't really like being all in on a bandwagon like this, but I think this is a very, very good core that they have in Houston right now. But that is all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Remember to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. To all of our viewers, be sure to check us out on social media as well for more exclusive short content. And we will be back tomorrow afternoon, same time as always, 2:00 p.m. Eastern. We will see you then. Take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet.